The Grim Drive podcast explores mental health through the lens of professional sports and athletes. Pro athletes come forward more and more with stories about their mental health journey, what they have endured, and how they managed to push through, reflecting a mental health stigma that continues to be reduced. Pro athletes also leverage mindset to achieve peak performance, as well as representing and often driving elements of popular culture through the use of social media, technology, and personal branding. This places athletes front and center as role models for people of all ages, giving them a platform to reach many and deliver important information, including information about mental health. Welcome to the Grim Drive podcast, where we explore mental health through the lens of professional sports and athletes. My name is Jotham Busfield. I am flying solo today. No John Cuna. He should be back in another week or two, or another episode or two, I should say. And today I'm going to be interviewing architect Matt Finn. So give a quick bio on Matt, and then I'll bring him in. Matt is passionate about how the built environment influences human health. He's a social entrepreneur and architect. A social entrepreneur is a person who pursues novel applications that have the potential to solve community-based problems. Matt Finn founded Cognitive Design in 2016. It's a consulting and design firm that works with researchers, psychologists, social workers, and clinicians to create architecture for health, which is the Cognitive Design's slogan. He splits his time between native Atlanta, where he'll be during the podcast that we're doing right now, and Molino, which is a rural town in the Florida Panhandle, where he currently resides with his wife Stephanie and their two daughters. A couple other little tidbits about Matt. He was the Healthcare Design Magazine 2016 HCD 10 researcher, and at that time he was the youngest recipient, the only non-PhD, and the first practicing architect, which is fantastic. His college, Kennesaw State University, named him a distinguished alumni in 2018, and his work has been featured by numerous academic institutions, media outlets, and conferences, including the U.S. Green Building Council, the Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture, and the American Institute of Architects. The Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture, or ANFA, is actually where I met Matt. Matt, welcome to the Grim Drive podcast. How are you, sir?
Thanks, Jotham. I'm doing great.
Fantastic. So I know, this, for people listening, we're starting to do some interviews, and we're looking to go outside the box with some of these interviews. I know we do the overlap of mental health and sports, but, we're a big believer in the impact of total health. We're a big believer in what's called embodied cognition, or cognition in general. And so we see an overlap between, John and I talk a lot about the impact of space on wellness overall. And it influences the way we set up our offices, and it influences our approach to the work, where we do sessions, things like that. So while it might not seem like a natural dovetail to some people listening, I think I was really excited to bring you on because I feel like it absolutely is. And it's only going to be more so as things kind of converge towards a total health perspective moving forward, which we might get into today. So I'd like to start with just a background. We talked about your design firm, Cognitive Design, which you started in 2016, I believe. I'll let you go from there, Matt. How did you decide to create that company?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I was working at a big corporate firm called Perkins & Will, and I was getting to do a lot of really good work. And about that time, I was taking my architect licensure exams, and those are pretty challenging. And
how many are there?
When I took them, there were 7. I think there are more now. And most people spend a year or two taking them while they're working professionally. And
sounds fun.
Go to college, yeah, exactly. I saw this. I went to a Blue Angel show down in Pensacola recently, and I saw this Marines recruiting tent, and they said, pain is weakness leaving your body. And I thought that was awesome. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of like architecture school in a totally different way, but
absolutely
relevant. So, the path to becoming a licensed architect is not, an easy or quick path. Yeah. And it was definitely right for me, but it's not right for everybody. And it certainly had its moments of doubt and question. And, for me, the real watershed moment came when I was taking these licensure exams. I was working and studying and taking tests, and I actually failed the last one that I took. And there was this moment where I was like, why am I doing this? I was just really beat myself up over it. And I did some professional soul searching, and for me the answer was pretty simple. It was because architecture really matters. Where people spend their time has an influence on their health and their behavior. And I was working on a critical access hospital out in a rural area of Georgia at the time, and we were making all kinds of design decisions like the size and shape and, direction windows face and inpatient bedrooms. And I wanted to know how these decisions that we were making were going to affect the health and health outcomes of the people that were healing and working there. Mm-hmm. So I started to ask these questions, and I realized there weren't any answers, at least none to the questions that felt very obvious that I was asking. So that's what, that's really the genesis of cognitive design. And from there, I started looking for a good place to answer this boil the ocean size question, and designing therapeutic environments for combat veterans with PTSD was the first topic that I really engaged with on a deep, academic and practical level. Mm-hmm. And that's what led to presenting, I presented some of that at the Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture conference, and that's where Jotham and I met. Mm-hmm. So that was a good start, and it's fun to be talking with you now as a result of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that, first and foremost, I have to say, I can't imagine you failing anything. So that's one thing. Matt is like one of the smartest people I've ever met, and it comes through every time we have conversations. So to see him fail anything just to me speaks to just how difficult architectural exams are. They're really designed to make the smartest people fail. So that's one thing. And two, I think it shows that even the most talented people have doubt, have self-doubt and don't have all the answers, and have to look in the mirror and sometimes question why they're doing something to recalibrate and kind of get back locked in again, which it sounds like you did, which is fantastic. The ANFA thing, I couldn't believe. I remember, what year was the ANFA presentation that you gave?
2016.
2016.
Or no, 2014, I'm sorry.
2014, okay. So ANFA is again, Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture, and it's this kind of, I guess, group of neuroscientists and architects, I think that's the best way to describe it, who, it's in La Jolla, California, which is just north on the coast above San Diego. Mm-hmm. And it's at this fantastic building done by Louis Kahn, which I recommend anyone, if they're ever in the Southern California, San Diego area, to go to La Jolla and check out the Salk Institute, SALK. He's my favorite architect of all time, and it's one of the coolest buildings I've ever seen. So that's where I went there, because while my first career was in architecture, I had long been since realized that wasn't gonna be the path for me. And yet I'm still fascinated by that topic. And when I heard neuroscientists and architects were sort of partnering up, I was like, oh, I have to be there just to see what this is all about. And a lot of it was really cool stuff, and kind of what some of the ideas I expected to see people at least try to tackle. And then to see Matt's presentation on creating an environment for people, for veterans dealing with PTSD, to me, that was just like, it really took it up a notch in terms of what I didn't expect to see anything like that. I didn't expect to see people even talking about the overlap with mental health. Because again, 2014, a lot has changed since 2014 or 2015. I think now, you were very far ahead of the curve for even bringing that up as a topic, which is what my eyes were like, completely wide open when I saw it. I was like, I got to talk to this dude. Like, what is this? This is amazing. So that's how we met. So I mean, it's great that you did that and that it led to cognitive design. I think that drives me to my next question, which is, how did you have the guts to break off from Perkins and Will? I would imagine a consistent, stable career where you're likely to move up the ranks, to have the guts to split off and do your own business. What was that like?
Yeah, that was a wild ride. So I was at Perkins and Will. I was able to get some pretty good momentum going around this research and working with a psychologist on architectural topics. Mm-hmm. And being in a real architectural practice, making real buildings. This is not an academic pursuit per se. And it opened the doors to a lot of other opportunities. Like, I got to collaborate with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and the CDC on childhood obesity in America, specifically looking at all the different factors, being able to collaborate with them through this organization mm-hmm. called NCARB, which is a long acronym for the National Collaborative on Childhood Obesity Research.
Okay, nice.
Rolls off the tongue. And, we got to look at some really interesting topics where environment and design are affecting people's health and their behaviors. And, I was realizing that there was this different way of practicing architecture that was super necessary I think to, practice at the highest level attainable. And I just wasn't able to sort of re-steer that giant ship. And Perkins Will does awesome work. I'm super proud of what I did while I was there, but it was apparent at some point that if I wanted to practice in sort of a fundamentally different way, that I needed to, break off and kind of rebuild an architectural practice from the ground up. So that's what I ended up doing.
That's amazing. So when it comes to the day-to-day business of cognitive design, is it a lot of contract clients that you work with? Is it some grant work? Is it a lot of pro bono? I know you do pro bono stuff too. What's the kind of the mix of how you guys usually do things?
Yeah, we're pretty much all contract work, for paying clients. We do some pro bono work. Most of our pro bono work is research that we publish for free. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I'm excited about right now is we're working on a definition of the word health. You mentioned the holistic nature of health. Mm-hmm. That's something that I'm really passionate about. And, I think is a super important, kind of whole in, society. Like we're not by and large looking at health as this, holistic thing. We kind of carve it up into all these different contrived aspects to manage the complexity of health, mm-hmm. which is a reasonable thing to do. But then we say your health is your physical health. So if you're not overweight and, you don't have a headache right now, you're just totally fine, even if your mental health may be completely suffering. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of connections between all these different aspects of health that we attempt to kind of compartmentalize and say, okay, your mental health is over here and your physical health is over there. We carve up each of those in all these different little segments. CDC in late 2019 released this great study correlating chronic anxiety and stress, things like PTSD, mm-hmm. and cardiovascular disease. And I mean, here are two aspects of health that we've developed our professional silos of education and diagnostics and practice. And, aside from somebody who's living that reality, that these aspects of health are definitely communicating and informing each other. Professionally, you don't see that being managed successfully. So as an architect thinking about environment affecting behavior, we look at things like environmental sustainability often, as an industry, which is wonderful. But if it's at the expense of, somebody's social health or, mm-hmm. or any number of other behavioral outcomes, that's something that needs to be considered and taken into account and managed. Absolutely. So,
I'm fascinated by the kind of whole health concept, and I might ask you to kind of define what you think that is in a second. I think one of the conversations John and I have had ongoing, and you and I have started to talk about it too, and I think John even covered it in the last, he just did an interview with Marco Sanchez, who's a strength coach and has his own, I think he's got 2 gyms. And I think what the conversation seems to be touching on is that, because of the mental health stigma for a long time, you sort of had this wide gap between physical health and mental health. And I think they've started to converge, which mm-hmm. is great. And that there's sort of an inevitability that eventually they're going to really meet at a certain point. And at that point, what does that look like in terms of whole health? And what does it look like in terms of building design and programmatic function, right? Our physical health services, whether it's, primary care doctors and that kind of thing, or gyms and exercise sort of settings, combining with mental health in some kind of way. That's sort of where we think it's going to go, or we hope it goes. Sure. So that's been an ongoing discussion. How would you sort of define whether it's health as a general word that encompasses all that, or do you have a working definition?
Yeah. So the way that I think about health is that it's the status of your health system. Mm-hmm. And these are all different kind of systems and interactions that are purposefully trying to manage, like the subject, it's either you or, an organism or an ecosystem or mm-hmm. an economy. Health is not only about people, although that's how we, most people primarily think of it that mm-hmm. way. So it's the status of the system of interactions and interrelated interactions between the subject and its environment. So we're continually, managing inputs, and whether that's, cultural inputs or social inputs or physical inputs, and maintaining a status of good health. And, I'm a words guy, so I like to, laugh about things like, I'm going to eat healthy today. That doesn't necessarily mean like anything, right?
Yeah.
Health is not inherently good or bad.
Yep.
We try and say like, I'm going to eat to facilitate good health. But then, diet's an easy one that for people to relate to, like, oh, don't eat a cupcake because it's not good for your health. Well, that's probably true in most ways, but celebrating your birthday with friends and, enjoying a cupcake on that occasion is probably fantastic for your health.
Very good point.
I heard this funny phrase, a happy cupcake is better than a sad salad, and I think that like that really that captures the sentiment pretty squarely, so it's it's just a very holistic way of looking at it. And again, I think the big fundamental mistake that's made when thinking about health is that we carve it up into these contrived aspects that are just completely man-made, compartmentalization of parts of this whole thing. And we suggest and believe that they're not interrelated to each other when in reality they are. So I don't have any objection to managing complexity in this way, but we've got to put things back in context of the whole before we can really understand them. So as an architect, I feel like, my profession and I are well positioned to see health in this way because we're designing places where people have their whole lived experience, right? I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not, really focused on that one, narrow aspect of health. I'm creating places where a bunch of different people who are all unique and individual will have their whole lived experience. So that positions architects, I think, to think about this in a way that has the potential to impact in a good way, other more detailed, and knowledgeable, professions that assess and diagnose and manage health.
That's fantastic. No, especially, really zooming out. And I think people, when it comes to health, they get really stuck in the system of one, right? They're just stuck in their own head, in their own body. They often blame themselves or things like that. And I think zooming out to look at it as the interaction between, in this case, the person and the environment, or you said the subject and the environment, I think is a really good way to look at it, because that's at the point where those things meet, I think, where health maybe happens or starts or that kind of thing. So I think that's a fantastic way to help people zoom out and look at it. I also think what you brought up about, not the cupcake versus salad example is just a great example of how things are never just cut and dry, right? They're never, I think people tend to be either perfectionists and or they tend to think in either or, like binary kind of terms. It's just easier for the human brain to kind of process information if it's out of two choices. And so I think, whether that's good versus evil, healthy versus unhealthy, I think people tend to get locked into that kind of filter. And so when they're at a party, they might look at it like, well, I'm on a diet, so I can't eat that. My diet says I can't eat it. I can't eat it. And I agree with you. There's a bigger picture to what health means, and you have to factor in a lot of different parts, a lot of different variables, not just one. I think people struggle with that sometimes, and yet hearing you describe it, I think will make it easier for people, because it's not just about sticking to one game plan, one angle of health. You really have to factor in that the enjoyment, the camaraderie, the ability to reward yourself in that setting at a birthday or that kind of thing. Overall, I would say the net gain of that for your overall well-being is probably higher than just the sheer, stick-to-itiveness of saying I cannot break from my diet and things like that. I think there's a lot of situations that happen like that with people where they really struggle to get out of that either or sort of fixated perfectionist sort of mode. So I think that's great the way you described it. So I want to talk a little bit about a couple works you did. I know you've collaborated with, or you've had as clients, Abby Griffith, who owns Clarity Fitness, and Mike Luttrell, who owns X3 Sports and X3 Foundation. So we're always fascinated with the role that design and architecture plays in everyday life in general, right across the board. But, in the last couple decades, I think it started to meander into pro sports a little bit more, with regard to whether it's stadiums or facilities just being, more money is being put into them. The thoughtfulness of the design is being considered for the players, for the fans, and all that kind of thing. I think it correlates with the sort of explosion of pro sports. I think one of the main things about that is that pro sports is the last live event thing that in an on-demand world. So I think that's one of the main reasons why, in terms of the spending that goes into it, those areas of life have grown. But I think the design of these spaces plays a huge role in parallel to that. And I want to get some more information from you, because working with Clarity Fitness and X3 Sports, what was it like to work on spaces like that or projects like that when it comes to the intersection of whether it's exercise and athletics and health?
It was fascinating and a lot of fun. I mean, these two companies are very different in terms of the clients that they serve and their marketing messaging, things of that nature, that as a consumer you would look at them and think these are very different products. But knowing the owners of both companies, they're very aligned in their orientation towards holistic health. And I actually did the work for X3 and Mike first, and later worked for Abby and helped her create the first Clarity Fitness.
Okay.
And Mike ended up, being a little bit of a mentor to Abby, and they have a good relationship now. It's a really tight community of these folks. So let me tell you about X3. I'll give you a cool example of how we think about health and design from each of these places. So both companies share that they are a gym where people pay a membership to come and exercise there. Their brands and what they offer their clients are pretty class heavy. You don't, join X3 or Clarity to go lift weights by yourself. That's not really, what they do best. Mm-hmm. But they have really cool classes. And they're both very smart about how they think about holistic health and, the experience of the folks that come to their facilities. So that as kind of the core of both businesses, very aligned. Mm-hmm. The folks that they serve are somewhat different though. So X3 focuses on sort of two main buckets of folks. They have, consumers, folks like me, makes up about 90% of their membership, I believe. And then they have some professional athletes. And their focus is on fighting sports. And they have professional fight teams, men's and women's, that are competitive on a world-class level. Mm-hmm. Kickboxing, boxing, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, MMA. They've got fighters in the UFC. I mean, they're the real deal, real tough guys, But most folks are like me, who thinks it's really fun to go take a kickboxing class from a professional coach who lived in Thailand and is a real badass. Yep. But I have no interest in actually sparring with anybody. Mm-hmm. So it's really exciting. It's exhilarating to go, play on a heavy bag and, get a really good workout in. It's like a game. It's fun. So they recognize that, that relationship, like that ability for somebody like me, who's an architect, I'm sitting behind a desk or on a job construction site most of the time, for me to be socially and like in our activity aligned with people from all different walks of life, all different backgrounds, that are all there to exercise in this way and have a chance to socialize with a, professional fighter, mm-hmm. is a really cool thing. And that's what makes the experience of going there in part largely novel and exciting, So they recognize, this is one of the things about their business that really makes it tick. So what we do is we look at that and we say, okay, how does environment affect behavior? And we're looking at things like social interactions. We're looking at motivation for exercising. I'll just stick to those two for this one example. So we look at the way exercising, social interactions, and motivation change compared to, being in other environments, mm-hmm. right? So if your, motivation while sitting at a desk and doing work on a computer is different than motivation while you're exercising with a group. And social interactions are different when you're, in a resting body state versus exerting, So what we found was that there's this correlation between exertion and willingness to cooperate with others, socialize, get along. Mm-hmm. So we found that if you map out the activities that somebody, takes part in while they come there, they park, They walk in, they check in, they drop off the things in the lockers, they go to the exercise area, they warm up, they go through a class, wipe down everything, head back to the lockers, and leave. That there's this period of time after class ends when they're like totally spent, at least I am,
Mm-hmm.
and before they enter the lockers, when people are naturally most primed and willing to socialize with other people. So when we look at architectural design, we think, okay, here's this period of time, and if you just mapped it out over the course of being there, it's an absolute sliver, right? When you think about going to the gym or exercising anywhere, that period of time when you're done exercising before you leave, that's just something that you try and blow through in most cases.
Mm-hmm.
But we recognize that like that is the period of time when people are most likely to make new friends, to, you know, strengthen existing relationships, to strike up a conversation with somebody they may not interact with at other parts of their day. And all we did was, you know, in a typical architectural design process, what you would do is you would kind of map out these places people go, and then you would just try and arrange the rooms so that people can kind of flow through the facility in a very efficient path. This is very appropriate if you're looking at like nursing in a hospital and you're trying to reduce the amount of walking, you know, that a nurse would do throughout the course of a day. But this is a gym. That's not a metric that matters.
Yep.
So we're looking at socialization as a metric that matters. So what we did was we took the place where people exercise and the place where you go right before you leave, the lockers, and we just moved them far apart from each other. And all we did was we took that sliver of time and just elongated it. So this was in a 2-story building. We put all the exercise areas downstairs and we put the lockers upstairs. And what that meant was, you know, you go and take a 45-minute kickboxing class, wipe down your bag, and then you walk, you know, across the exercise floor and up a flight of stairs, up shoulder to shoulder with somebody who you just went through.
Mm-hmm.
In non-scientific terms, it is impossible to not acknowledge that they're there.
Yeah.
You know? And when you form these, you know, these friendships with people, you're accountable to them to come back. It improves adherence to an exercise regimen. It has a lot of benefits. You know, you're going to, you know, people feel on average more motivated to come to class and try harder while they're there. All of these things benefit everybody, you know, so we're not taking away any kind of freedom of choice. We're not trying to like collect and distribute people's phone numbers or home addresses or anything weird like that.
You're kind of getting them out of their own way by arranging or you know, creating a space that prevents their own sort of, you know, blind spots from getting in their own way, basically, right?
That's exactly right. And the reason that like when you enter the lockers is significant is because, you know, the dynamics of a conversation either completely end if you're going into separate lockers, or they change because some people don't want to be social while they're changing clothes, myself included. So
that's our generation. The generation above us is like just wearing nothing, talking like all day like it's no big deal. I'm like,
go hang out in the sauna.
Exactly. Not our generation or beneath it. Yeah, exactly. All set with that.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is an example where we're just looking at the way people work. You know, it's not architecturally stylistic. It's not, you know, reducing freedom of choice or anything like that. We're just acknowledging that people are social and we're naturally more likely to be social following physical exertion. So we're going to try and maximize the time that people have, you know, the opportunities for people to do that. And that's it.
That is fantastic. Yeah, I think the physical exertion as a primer, you know, primer for social connection, primer for learning even, I think is really so huge for people. And the fact that you design the space to really tailor to that and account for maybe some repetitive tendencies. I think people get into habits or associations with past gyms that they've been in terms of like you said, blowing right through that post-workout stage, right to the locker to grab their stuff and go, or to shower and change and things like that, is amazing. And also the separation of those two things, you know, where the gym is versus where the locker room is at, also makes me think of the building where ANFA is at, you know, where that Louis Kahn building, where I think I want to say he was the first person to really take laboratory. So the Salk Institute was a you know, basically a scientific laboratory building, right? There's labs on the ground and maybe subground level, and he took those, kept them down there, and really separated and elevated the offices of the scientists to have them be distinctly separate spaces that the offices are elevated, separate, and also look out onto the horizon line in the ocean to really stimulate creativity. And it sounds like you're doing like a really cool version of this too, where it's like you're looking at how to separate those spaces architecturally for the benefit of the person using the building.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're looking at health holistically and acknowledging the way that all these things are interrelated. I mean, it's pretty apparent, I think, from that example that we're looking at physical health as one heavily influenced, maybe not directly a byproduct, but like it's very tightly related to your social environment. So, I can't make the weights heavier or people punch the bag harder, but we can definitely create an environment that facilitates motivation and adherence to, going to the gym on a regular basis. So,
well, and this also
are the levers that we pull.
Totally. And you mentioned the cupcake salad example earlier. I think this applies to that too, because when people think health, right, they're in a literal sense, they're probably thinking exercise. But if you zoom out from that cupcake salad perspective, it's really about what does social connection do for your overall health? Because it's huge. Sure. I mean, there's been research that ties that to life expectancy and how long you live. I think in the U.S. in particular, loneliness has never been more of a problem than it is now, probably because we're more of an individualist culture than a collectivist culture. So you're clearly tapping into that in such a huge way, and it shows how design can impact health, and not just in a literal sense, but in a really zooming out and seeing the bigger picture.
Yeah, totally. We wrote a white paper. We started it in 2018 and released it in January of 2020 on social isolation in the built environment. And then a couple months after January 2020, social isolation became relevant to way more people, unfortunately. And we identified like risk factors, environmental risk factors for that. And then recently we've revisited the topic, looking at what risk factors changed during 2020 that statistics became available for. And it is definitely an unfortunate situation and something that just is not unmanageable. We just got to be aware of it and do what we can and acknowledge it as important. And I think that's what's missing from a lot of people's approach to health, is that they're defining it far too narrowly and wind up overlooking things that are really important and maybe have less acute outcomes, but definitely have profound long-term, influence.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's fantastic. So we talked about X3 Sports. So Clarity Fitness came second. How would you compare those, or what stands out about Clarity Fitness? Yeah,
so Clarity was a lot of fun. One thing I should mention is that X3 did not get built, unfortunately. So that was a little fear for.
I'm sure that happens often, right?
Projects.
Yeah,
it does. Yeah, as an architect, I think somewhere between a third and a half of projects get built, the rest don't. So that's a normal thing that we're used to as architects, but it's still very disappointing.
Yeah.
So they have other gyms and they're operating, and like most gyms, they're dealing with the COVID precautions and all that. So I hope they get to stick around because they do a lot of good things.
Absolutely.
So Clarity was a new gym, new brand. This young woman, Abby Griffith, she's a personal trainer. She has an industrial engineering background, and she is a eating disorder recovery, and she's a part of the body positive movement. So body positivity is all about exercising as a form of self-care, sort of meeting yourself where you are, exercising because you love yourself, not because I don't like the way that this part of my body looks, or I'm trying to impress or please any other person.
Love it.
Group of people.
Yep.
It's really holistic health,
yeah.
Focused. I think it's just absolutely fantastic. And what we were looking at there was, how do we make a body positive gym? With that as the primary focus, that's a very holistic approach to exercise. Movement is definitely a part of holistic health. So how do we create a place where the focus is not on having the physique of a model or, any of those other, unsustainable, unhealthy motives, and create a place where exercise is fun, and we're looking out for people who may be coming to this gym because they're struggling with some of those issues. So when we look at a place like a gym, for example, we do design a lot of other places, but these are the couple we're going to talk about today.
Mm-hmm.
There's a certain amount of things that you do at a gym that are universal, right? People are lifting weights, they're doing cardiovascular exercises on, bikes or ellipticals or stair climbers. There's some space for group exercise classes like yoga or, whatever they're doing. And, these are reasonably predictable spaces as far as what is needed to do the actual activity, right? Mm-hmm. So there's not a whole lot of thinking that's required to sort of find a place for somebody to do, a bench press.
Mm-hmm.
But when you think about the way environment affects behavior, right, providing the space for that is totally different than providing a space that facilitates good health in the particular way that we're looking at it for this project, body positivity. So gyms, a universal feature of gyms, just as one example, is mirrors, right? And if we're tailoring this space to body positivity and serving people that may be struggling with how they perceive themselves or, overly critical thinking about, how they look or feel today, seeing your own reflection can certainly instigate thoughts that may not be beneficial for some folks. And by no means is a gym going to like cause or resolve any issues like that. You got to work with a psychotherapist or a counselor who can help you from that angle as well.
Yep.
But when we look at gyms, like we see these giant wall-to-wall mirrors, we thought, okay, we're looking at perception of self. The mirrors feel like an obvious thing for us to look into. Let's not just do the default. You need some clear floor space to do some, bicep curls, but what happens outside of that physical space? And we started looking in the mirrors. And what we found was that even though mirrors are a universal feature of most exercise gyms, the way people respond to mirrors is far from universal. So what we found was that on average, and this is according to the literature that we found, males typically know how to use mirrors better because they tend to participate in exercise activities like weightlifting, that they learn how to use a mirror so they can, know what to look for in their reflection. So on average, men benefit more than women. We found that if you're struggling with body positivity issues, a lot of times seeing your reflection is not helpful. It can instigate critical thinking about yourself.
For sure.
We found that if you don't know how to use a mirror, which is something you can easily learn, but if you don't know how to use it, a lot of times it can actually have a negative outcome, right? Think you're doing bicep curls and you want to look at your shoulder from the back or something, it can really cause you to like compromise your form.
Yep.
And pay less attention to your body and, the sensations of lifting weights and allowing, your own movements and feelings and responses, participating to like guide your actions and use that as a form of learning. So, in that regard, we recognize that mirrors are not fantastic in every situation, and they are fantastic in some situations, right? If you're knowledgeable and a high-performing athlete, having mirrors and being able to use them as a tool for achieving the highest levels of physical performance is really beneficial. So we've got this situation where we don't want mirrors and we want mirrors. So what do we do? So our approach in this gym was to first reduce where we have mirrors. So instead of having, a big room with the wall-to-wall, floor-to-ceiling mirrors for, weightlifting and cardio and all this kind of stuff, we only put mirrors where exercise would take place, where it was beneficial to use mirrors if you were one of those folks that could use it, right? So just at the weightlifting areas, not in front of the treadmills or, elliptical. And we put those, that equipment with beautiful views of nature. And instead of using, and we kind of contain them to these like little exercise stations. So we naturally space them out so that, it's not a wall-to-wall mirror. So you can not be standing in front of a mirror if you choose. There's kind of enough space to be between the mirrors or in front of one.
So that individual choice is built in.
That's right. Yeah. Exactly. So in addition to that approach of like producing mirrors, we use them in a very decorative way so that it's not the mirror at the gym, right? Mm-hmm. It's an architectural material that we've used. So it fades into the background a little bit.
Okay.
And we didn't use bright silver mirrors. We used gray glass mirrors. So these are basically, think about looking at your reflection in a mirror versus in a mirror when you're wearing sunglasses.
Okay.
Or if you were to put like window tint, like you put on your car, put that on the mirror.
So it gives you enough to see what you need to see, but it's not bombarding you with every like hyper detail. Yes.
Right. And yeah, it's fully functional for observing your form if you know what to look for and you're paying attention to that. But otherwise, it doesn't make you feel like you're standing in the middle of a room if you're standing at the edge of it. It doesn't, prompt a lot of those, self-conscious thoughts. It's far less detracting from the sensations, distracting from the sensations of the movements that you're doing. Mm-hmm. And right now we're doing we're getting feedback from the people that use the gym, and, they like this feature. A lot of folks that come to this gym come there in part because of the design and because of the culture of holistic health and the way that they, talk about and approach and encourage, good motives. And they, people have said, like, I hate mirrors in the gym. I hate these less,
Well, I think the choice and the comfort that comes from that, and I'm sure from other features, that makes a person feel like they want to come back, right? It creates a positive association. It creates the ability to either feel good about yourself or not being bombarded by reasons to feel bad, which I think is the same kind of thing. And that leads to a person or multiple people wanting to come back, which I think is not only good for the business, it's good for the people, and it builds community as well. So this is really fascinating, Matt. Those two projects in particular, I mean, I'm sure we're going to have a part 2 because I want to talk about some of these other projects you've done, as well as a few other topics. But this has been fascinating for today. We are going to wrap up at this point, and we'll continue on to maybe schedule a part 2. Are you on board for that? What do you think?
I'm down. And I'll send you a link you can put in the description of this. And the Clarity Fitness was built, so we've got photos of that, and folks can go on there and check out what these gray glass mirrors look like and read about some of the other things that we did to facilitate good health.
Fantastic. I'm going to definitely put links to everything we talked about in the show notes so that everyone can access that information. As always, we want to remind people just to subscribe on YouTube to the Grim Drive podcast if you want to check out some of our past episodes or listen to some future ones. I want to thank everyone for listening to the Grim Drive podcast for this interview with Matt Finn, architect. Thanks, Matt.
Awesome. Thanks, Jonathan.